I got 10 seconds.
Oh,
I yield back. Thank you, ma'am.
all right, thank you, gentlemen. The gentlelady from Washington, Ms. Jagopal. You have 5 minutes, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I really appreciate this hearing, and I'm always stunned at the what feels like a lot of hypocrisy in the comments that get made in this committee. The hypocrisy of exploiting labor but not wanting to honor that labor with immigration reform, or the hypocrisy of saying we want mandatory e-verify without immigration reform when even the farmers have told us that they don't want that because they need the workers. So I hope we can get to a place where we're not denying that overtime premium should apply to all workers. Why should some workers be asked to work without that overtime? I just don't understand that at all. We're here today to take responsibility for the legacy of the Fair Labor Standards Act, which excluded domestic workers and farm workers from protection. I want to focus on domestic workers. Today, over 2.5 million nannies, house cleaners, and care workers do the work of caring and cleaning in homes across this country. Over half of these domestic workers are Black, Hispanic, Asian American, or Pacific Islander. And in 1930, an estimated 79% of domestic workers in the South were Black. So domestic workers have traditionally been people of color. Ms. Dixon, how would you explain this fact, and how does it relate to the ongoing exclusion of live-in domestic workers from benefits such as overtime protections under the Fair Labor Standards Act?
This rule was rooted in racism, as we talked about earlier in my testimony, and the fact that it moved from one set of women of color to another set of women of color is not a surprise. The moment is now to get rid of this. There is no reason that we allow this exploitation to continue.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, thank you for mentioning my Domestic Workers Bill of Rights. That bill would fix this for domestic workers by extending common workplace rights and protections to domestic workers, including overtime pay, paid sick days, privacy, and other civil rights protections. The bill also extends new workplace rights and benefits that address the unique challenges of domestic work, requiring written agreements, fair scheduling provisions, a national domestic worker hotline, and a standards board to investigate standards in the industry. And it would create and fund an interagency task force on protecting domestic workers' workplace rights to ensure robust enforcement of the law. These protections are crucial for domestic workers like a woman I'll call Ramona. She is a home care worker, and she's a leader with the National Domestic Workers Alliance in my district. She's an immigrant from Honduras who identifies as Black. Ramona has faced sexual harassment and assault as a domestic worker in every city she's worked in, but she never reported the incidents because she didn't know where to turn. Ms. Yoon, your testimony indicated that Ramona's experience is common among domestic workers. How do we protect domestic workers from sexual harassment and assault on the job?
Yes, the experience of domestic worker you just shared is unfortunately too common. Workers know that they have no recourse, but because they're not currently covered by Title VII and thus not protected from sexual harassment, assault in their workplace. This is the reason why we need to pass the Domestic Worker Bill of Rights to protect individual workers, but also establish standards across the country in these workplaces.
Ms. Yoon, Mr. DeCamp seems to deny any racist motivations behind denying domestic workers protections under the FLSA, instead suggesting that a narrow reading of the Commerce Clause at the time was the only reason these workers were excluded. Is that the case? And is there any legitimate reason to continue excluding domestic workers from the full protections of the FLSA?
No, that is not true. My reading of the committee debates, as well as other research on the Roosevelt administration's drafting of the process, depicts a different story. While domestic service certainly was not comparable to the agricultural sector in terms of its importance to the Southern economy, the huge concentration of Blacks in the domestic service was unmatched by any other sector in the Southern economy. During the committee debates, Southern legislators compared FLSA to anti-lynching legislation. I think that statement speaks for itself. And in terms of what we should do now, systemic racism and sexism motivated the exclusion in 1938, And then 80 years later, this workforce continues to bear the brunt of that legacy. We have to think about the cost of not protecting these essential workers who help our society to function and make all other work possible. It means that domestic workers are earning poverty wages and cannot support their own children and family when they're working to care for other children.
Thank you so much. I think for Ramona and for so many others like her, we are ready to be the authors of a new story, and that begins with passing the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I yield.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,